Welcome summer with your light dresses and relaxing evenings outside, and even your weddings, conferences, and hopefully vacations. This means it's also time to lean into our sponsor, Honeylove. Honeylove Shapewear features lingerie-inspired design details that you may even want to show off and is made with breathable fabric that keeps you nice and cool. Perfect for hot days. For a limited time only, you can get Honeylove on sale. Get 20% off your entire order with our exclusive link, honeylove.com/birthful. Support our show and check them out at honeylove.com/birthful. Now, one of my biggest peeves is when, say, I'm feeling cute in a cocktail dress and have to constantly run off to the bathroom to adjust the short legs of my shapewear that keep creeping up instead of helping create smooth lines. No, thank you. Now, thanks to Honeylove, I'm confident knowing that their shapewear won't ever roll up or down, no matter how much fun I'm having on the dance floor. If you want to follow my lead on that conga line this summer, then go to honeylove.com/birthful to get your own Honeylove's best-selling Superpower short for a flawless silhouette under any outfit. Treat yourself to the best bras and shapewear on the market and save 20% off at honeylove.com/birthful. Use our exclusive link to get 20% off. honeylove.com/birthful. And after you purchase, they'll ask you where you heard about them. Please support our show and tell them we sent you. The summer vibes are just getting started. Shape your life with Honeylove. I'm going to cut to the chase. If you're trying to conceive, pregnant, or postpartum, you're going to benefit from taking prenatal supplements. But despite there being an abundance of options, most of them include the bare minimum nutrition and are based on outdated guidance and stale research. So, if you ask what supplement brand I recommend, I enthusiastically say it's Needed. And it's not just me. Needed is recommended and used by more than 4,000 women's health experts, from nutritionists to midwives, functional medicine doctors, and OBGYNs. As a Birthful listener, you can get 20% off your first month right now at thisisneeded.com with the code BIRTHFUL. Needed offers the forms of nutrients your body can actually use, and they go above and beyond with third-party testing every batch to ensure the safest product. They also consider how to best get you that nutrition. So, for example, Needed's Prenatal Multi is available in both capsules and as an easy-to-take vanilla powder, perfect for those experiencing nausea or pill fatigue. Needed offers premium supplements for every stage, from egg quality support for those trying to conceive to a lactation support plan, a cognitive support for postpartum brain fog, and some amazing hydration packs that I can't live without. Head over to thisisneeded.com and use the code BIRTHFUL for 20% off your first month of Needed products. That's thisisneeded.com and use the code BIRTHFUL for 20% off your first month of Needed products. Welcome to Birthful, Mighty Parent or Parent-to-Be. I'm Adriana Lozada.
The most satisfactory birth experiences are not ones in which you get what you get. It is that you are listened to, is that you were provided an opportunity, yes, to be heard and is to have been respected. And you can do a lot of work in making that happen for yourself.
That's certified nurse midwife Dr. Stephanie Mitchell, who is also the author of the First Time Parents Childbirth Handbook, a step-by-step guide for building your birth plan, talking about the key elements for having a satisfying birth experience, which starts with figuring out what's important to you and communicating it with your birth team. And this conversation is part of our larger series on defining your birth preferences and birth plan. Our goal is that you have the most helpful birth plan possible. And so Dr. Stephanie and I will be talking about how to make your birth plan the amazing tool that it can be, how it can serve you both during pregnancy and birth, and why you should really think twice about anyone who dismisses your birth plan, because if they don't support your plan, then whose plan are you going to get? You're listening to Birthful, here to inform your intuition. Welcome, Stephanie. I am so happy and honored to have you here on the show. Before we get started, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself and how you identify?
Thank you so much for having me here. I'm so excited to talk to you today. My name is Stephanie Mitchell. People call me Stephanie. People call me Mom. People call me Dr. Mitchell. I'm a midwife and a mother and a wife. And so however I meet people along their journey, we learn to name each other however we fit into each other's circle and worldview. So thanks for that. That's so great. It's she and her are my pronouns, and that's awesome. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you. So birth plans. Why even write a birth plan in the first place?
Well, for the majority of people, which is 98% of American birthers who are going to have a baby, have a tendency to be cared for in an industrial type setting. And a lot of people may not feel like that. They're like, oh, wait, but I go to my local clinic and I love my midwives and doctors. What do you mean industrial? What do you mean? What are you talking about? I mean that the way that healthcare is set up for folks who are pregnant and the industry of obstetrics has really changed a lot in the last, certainly quarter of a century, but more so than that. It's really over the last century. We've seen some dynamic changes in how care is delivered. And so industrial, when I say that in that sense, I mean high volume, fast paced. And to accomplish these things, you have to be pretty industrialized about it. You have to have a certain regimen and regime in order to keep things running at a smooth kind of pace. And so when you have a birth plan, it says to folks, wait a second, I understand this is industry. I get this is industry, but there are some things that I may want or that are important to me that are outside of what type of care you are providing to individuals. So this is the purpose of a birth plan. It's just like hold on, I'm an individual here. I know what you guys are doing, but get to know me for a moment, get to know some of the things that are important to me. And I know we're just meeting here today as I'm here to have my baby, but there has been a whole lot of thought and a whole lot of planning before I got here today in labor. And I'd like to share that with you.
Well, and I so agree. And I think it was Rockstar Magazine, Shalom Stone, that once told me, she was like, winging it is not a birth plan. And there was a quote in your book that really unpacked that in a way that just resonated so much with me. And the quote was, those who do not express any preference will get the standard hospital or birth center experience based on the experience, comfort, and preferences of the provider or birth space, and not on points important to the individual, which is what you're saying. But I think we've got to stress that if you don't present your choices, then you're just going to get the default.
I was just about to say, no plan is our plan. It's the things that we do all the time and we're probably highly comfortable with, but it's influenced by our experiences as labor and delivery nurses, as technicians in the hospital, as obstetricians, as midwives. It is a job. It is root and routine and that's what it is. And you've come into this as an individual. This may be your first time going through this, but this is what we do every day. It becomes very much routine. And so when you come here into these spaces and you don't have a plan, that's cool. That's fine. We got you covered. We do this every day. You're getting the standard operating procedure. And there's not anything inherently wrong per se, but it's just the standard. And you've got to know what the standard is so that when you don't want what the standard is, you can be like, oh no, I don't want that. I've done my due diligence. Here's my birth plan. And this is kind of what it is.
Well, and the other thing to understand there is there are different interests in play. And if you don't come advocating for your own interests and your own choices, and you're going to get the routine one, it might not be putting your interest in the forefront. As we're seeing, the perinatal system is not the greatest, and it brings with it a lot of inequities. So what we're seeing, if you just default to whatever the standard plan, you might really suffer
It's actually a flawed system on so many levels. But what we're seeing these days is something that the United States would like to refer to as a maternal mortality crisis. And what the crisis actually is that there's a huge disparity in the outcomes for women who are Black and having birth and their outcomes, and women who are counterparts or not Black or African American identifying. There's a huge disparity. So that goes to show us, like, at baseline, wait a second, at baseline, perhaps what we're just offering you might not quite be good enough. And so there's certainly some aspects to start taking a closer look at. And I think birth plan is just the easy way to say, hold on a second now. Wait a minute. I done seen your standard operating procedure and I don't want it, because the outcomes are not conducive to me wanting something of that nature.
So then, okay, you're convinced that you need to write a birth plan. Where do you start?
You could start anywhere along the timeline of being pregnant, or even beforehand. I advise people to jump around, look at a birth plan, see what's on it. What does that even consist of? What are the subtopics? What am I even going to be deciding about? Some folks right off the bat, they're like, oh yes, I know I want this. This is absolutely critical. And other things maybe are not so important. And then some areas I have no idea about. So that kind of tells you how much time you need to be devoting towards learning about some of your other options. So that's just in terms of like the physical nature of the birth plan. That's where you start. But some folks, it might not even be that piece of it. They may find, as they're starting to crack the can, as they start going through their birth plan, it unearths some things that maybe they were not aware of.
Why don't you tell us what are some of the sections or parts that a birth plan includes?
When you think about a birth plan, the majority of it is going to be about when you're in that actual birth space. So we devote a lot of time talking about like the environment of the birth space, who you want to be there, what do you want it to feel like, what things make you feel safe or, that you want. The other pieces have to do with like the actual labor course, meaning you want or not opposed to having IVs, or rather you would rather be maintaining your hydration status orally. Other pieces of the birth plan have to do with your preferences for pain management strategies, things that you'd like to try or not try. Would you like to be offered medication? Would you like to be offered the ability to get up and move around or get into the water? These are the things that are like the critical pieces of it or components of it. It's a piece of paper, really. I mean, when we get down to it, it's just a piece of paper, but it's so dynamic because when we think about birth in general, there's so many facets that come into play that there's no way we could possibly organize or predict all of the pieces that will come into play. So you've got to prepare for all of the pieces and you've got to go through all of the pieces.
Yeah. And at the end, what you want is something that is almost like a resume. Like very short, to the point, but there's all this distilling of information that I find goes through in the path towards getting to that final document. Would you agree with that?
It's absolutely kind of what I spoke to in the book in terms of like the discussion plan versus the actual birth plan, because really that is what it's about. At the end of it, you have a single piece of paper, but you cannot allow this piece of paper to just be kind of cast aside or not listened to, because that is quite a tendency of sometimes individuals when they see these things like, wait a minute, this is what we do all the time, or we might know better. And I know this because I have history as labor and delivery nurse and a midwife. So I have a little bit of a different perspective on what it means to us when people hand over their birth plan. But the amount of work and time that you have put into developing the choices on this piece of paper should not be a willy-nilly thing. It should never be tossed aside. It is critical. It is like, I've taken the time to go through all of these things. I've unearthed the plans that are going to be important for me, for my labor course, for my newborn. It distills through all of the work that you've done through the course of this pregnancy so that you can have a satisfactory birth experience.
It's frustrating to me when people say, oh, my care provider said the longer your birth plan, the higher your chances of having a cesarean. And it's very dismissive of not only, the wishes of the person, but also the amount of work that they put into this wonderful piece of paper to try to help with communication of their wishes. What if people are finding their birth plan is being dismissed or somebody's rolling their eyes? What can they do at that moment?
One of the most critical things that needs to really occur for the process of labor and birth to occur in its most unencumbered state is for someone to be in a place of physical and mental safety. You want to be safe presenting as you are. It is not a moment to have to worry about whether people are thinking about you or whether people support you or all of these things. I would just question how I would feel about going to a provider when I start to ask these questions about a birth plan and I am feeling dismissed, ignored. You have to wonder what that means for you when you are in probably one of the most vulnerable physical states of your life. And you know that what you want is going to be laughed at, dismissed, and ignored. That's not the time. You need to be going into your birth and you need to be knowing who's on your team, who are your people. So I question, if you bring up a birth plan and you get like that type of response, that does not bode well for you being in a space of physical, mental safety at the time where you need it most. So those are the questions that I encourage people. Start asking these questions. And if folks get uncomfortable, you need to decide on what the reason is that they're getting uncomfortable, that you've decided to do your due diligence about what you'd like for your labor and your birth. And a birth plan has nothing to do with making medical decisions because you're not you're just a human being. This isn't your thing, but the body is your thing and the labor is your thing. And so you actually do get a huge, huge chunk of say so and autonomy to this entire process. This should be brought up early on. You want a provider that's going to be on the same page that you are. And it's really a tough thing because you may go to a provider and see them all pregnancy and feel really great about that relationship, only to find that you are moving to a birth space that is not with the provider that you've seen during the pregnancy. And it is including an entire group of folks that have never met you before.
One of my favorite daily habits is having a glass of water first thing in the morning. It helps me rehydrate from the night, which helps me keep my migraines at bay. It also gets my metabolism going, helps me feel more awake, promotes digestion, lessens constipation. And what makes all of that even better is that it's a glass filled with deliciously clean water from our AquaTrue water purifier. Honestly, it's really the most delicious water ever, and I would love for you to experience this yumminess for yourself. As a Birthful listener, you can get 20% off any AquaTrue purifier at aquatrue.com with the code BIRTHFUL. Now, AquaTrue purifiers use a 4-stage reverse osmosis purification process that has been independently tested to remove over 80 of the most harmful contaminants, including chlorine, fluoride, arsenic, nitrate, and PFAS, also known as forever chemicals. And let me tell you, those nasty suckers are found in almost 45% of U.S. tap water. So I, for one, am really happy AquaTrue removes them. In our family, we all love our AquaTrue water purifier and highly recommend that you give them a try. AquaTrue comes with a 30-day money-back guarantee and even makes a fantastic gift, like in a baby registry. Today, my listeners receive 20% off any AquaTrue purifier. Just go to aquatrue.com, that's AQUATRU.com, and enter the code BIRTHFUL at checkout. That's 20% off any AquaTrue water purifier when you go to aquatrue.com and use the promo code BIRTHFUL. I don't know about you, but when life is busy, and honestly, it feels like it's busy all the time, it is so easy to put off investing because it doesn't seem urgent. The thing is, in order to grow, investments need time. So instead of waiting for that elusive moment when you'll have enough time and motivation to research and manage investing, just start today. Do it with Acorns. Acorns makes it easy to start automatically saving and investing for your future. And one of my favorite parts is that you don't need a lot of money or expertise to invest with Acorns. In fact, you can get started with just your spare change. Acorns makes investing super simple by recommending an expert-built portfolio that fits you and your money goals. Then they automatically invest your money for you. So for example, I use Acorns Roundup setting, which, you guessed it, rounds up the spare change whenever I buy something using my linked account. And when all that change adds up to $5, they transfer it to my Acorns Invest account. So yes, when life is busy, Acorns does the investing for me based on agreed parameters. And then when I have time, I can go in and adjust if needed. Head to acorns.com/birthful or download the Acorns app to start saving and investing for your future today. Client testimonial. Compensation provides incentive to positively promote Acorns. Investing involves risk. Acorns Advisor LLC and SEC registered investment advisor. View important disclosures at acorns.com/birthful. And I really appreciate in that aspect that in the book you mentioned a birth plan as this living document where you have two phases to it. You've got your discussion plan and your birth plan is the final document. But this discussion plan involves actually discussing it with your care provider, with your partner, with anybody who's going to be part of your birth team, knowing that, say, you won't know who the nurse is, but everybody else should be on your side already and knowledgeable of what's in this birth plan. So what could that discussion look like throughout your pregnancy with your care provider?
I think a lot of times when people think about labor and birth, there's obviously the component of like pain or being uncomfortable and that type of thing. And there are various methods and modalities to be able to manage that. So I think a large portion of people's birth plan is like how they are planning to get through that process, be it through an environment that is comfortable to them, meaning like what we talked about before, like the lights and the room and the people around you, or be that by modalities of medication or other methods of like either meditation or IV pain medicine or hydrotherapy or all of the other methods of pain control. A lot of times, if you are unprepared in the how you plan to manage the discomfort and frankly pain of labor and childbirth, then you get into a situation where the default is what you get, which is what I would venture to say 90% of people choose, which is epidural anesthesia, which is a fine choice for pain control. But how have you chosen this as your method of pain control, but you haven't done any due diligence prior to that, so that when you arrive at the hospital, you're like, wait a minute, I didn't know I have to be here by myself in this room. Wait a minute, I didn't know that I have to have an IV in order to have this. Hold on, I didn't know that I need a catheter. But if you haven't cracked the discussion about it, then you haven't provided yourself enough opportunity to receive information to make choices that are going to be good choices for you. And the most satisfactory birth experiences are not ones in which you get what you get. It's where you've had autonomy and you are part of the decision-making team. And it doesn't mean that everything works out how you envisioned it working out. That's not what a satisfactory birth experience it consists of necessarily. It is that you were listened to, is that you were provided an opportunity, yes, to be heard and to be a member of the team or not be railroaded into making decisions. Is to have been offered consent. It is to have been respected. It is to have been provided additional resources and support. It is to be cared for in the best possible way in the postpartum period. These are things that make the birth experience satisfactory. And you can do a lot of work in making that happen for yourself if you are prepared.
one of the things I really appreciated in the book was that you had questions to ask the place of birth, questions to ask of your provider, but also questions to ask of your partner. And I think that's something that people forget when planning a birth plan is, and questions for your doula too, right? Like everybody who's going to be there, but the questions with your partner, why is that important?
It's so important. Oh my goodness, the most important thing. I'm going to tell you why. Because we have ideas of how we envision other people. And so we may have preconceived notions about how we envision our partner in that birth space. And we might envision them as being very hands-on and really into the process and maybe up into, catching the baby, or you may envision something like that, which is a reasonable, valid option for a lot of folks. But you don't have this discussion with your partner. Okay. And they don't want nothing to do with that piece of it. And they'd rather be a more passive bystander. And that is also a very valid way to enter into the birth space. The miscongruence that we have here is when folks end up in the birth space and they've never kind of had this discussion about their level of comfort, the things that are important to them. Then we end up with a real problem. And I mean this on several fronts. One, on a physical level, like I said before, your body functions at its peak capability when it is safe. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. We must have our physical safety, and it moves on to psychological safety and all of these things on board for our bodies to function at peak capacity. I've had folks who've clearly never had a conversation about to their provider or to their partner about how they felt to be physically exposed. I'm particularly second stage when you're pushing the baby out and it requires for you to be in sort of a position that it could be very exposing and vulnerable. I have had folks who physically resisted their body because they were so uncomfortable with being exposed. And so if you don't have these conversations with your partner beforehand, and not just like on the physical aspect of like your levels of vulnerability, but like, how do they feel to see you cry? How will they feel if you do something out of line, like that you don't normally do, like curse or, sitting on the toilet and having bowel movements? Is that what you do in regular life? If that's the way your relationship rolls, that's fine. That's fine. But there is some very vulnerable activities that occur during labor and birth. And if you haven't talked about this, you may find yourself, both of y'all, in a very uncomfortable situation. And I hate it for y'all. Ask the questions. And that's of your provider, and that's of your doula, and that's of your partner, because you're going to learn something.
I really love having a birth plan as one of the structured ways that you can have those conversations so that your partner and doula and provider and everybody else can discover what your wishes are and can then figure out if they're going to be there to support you, or if they're like, no, I cannot do that, then okay, then you figure it out ahead of time, not during the birth, like you're saying.
Right. I've seen a lot of moms of women who have assumed that their daughter was going to want them in the labor and birth room. And I'm like, sister, you better have this conversation with your mama early, because she comes up here to every appointment and she really thinks this is part of her day. When you done told me that she's not going to be there, y'all haven't had this discussion, and I need you to do it. I need you to do it. You've got to jump right in.
And I feel it's almost kind of like stepping up to that parenting role of showing up and being there. You can't continue to avoid conversations. It's a practice in parenting too, right? Oh my gosh. I have a few logistical questions for you. What is the benefit of having your care provider sign off on your birth plan?
A birth plan is not a contract. It is not a medical negotiation. Things change in labor. It is dynamic. A signature of your provider means that we've gone over each of these things, and I, as your provider, who have taken care of you during the entire course of your pregnancy and not just meeting you today, agree that what you have planned for your birth are a reasonable option for you as a first time, second time, or whatever, normal, healthy individual. I've read it. We've talked about it. And that's why I signed it. There's no reason a provider should not sign off on someone's birth plan. It doesn't mean you like it or you love it, because we are autonomous individuals. It means we have talked about everything on there, and that is what it is. So find me a provider who don't want to sign off on your birth plan, and you found me a provider who don't give a shit about what you want for your individual options. And that's all I have to say about that. I'm fired up.
I like it. So, no, and I really appreciate it because as you have these provider groups that are numerous, you've got 10, 12, 15 individuals, you don't know who's going to be there for your day of birth. And so having that signature in the bottom that says so-and-so looked at this and we have discussed it and they said, okay, this is something we can do for you, then, it arms you with a little bit of power. A little bit of like, not that I'm going to guarantee that this needs to happen, but I've had the discussion and somebody told me I could have this. Absolutely. So why are you telling me now that I can't?
Honestly, you get to decide. And that's what it is at the end of the day. And there's not a single provider on earth that will say anything caveat to that. At the end of the day, you get to decide.
Full stop. When you get to the hospital or the birth center, when is the best time to give your birth plan to the care provider? Immediately.
As a matter of fact, there's not a single place that really wants you to just show up unannounced, whether it's a birth center or whether it's a hospital. They're usually expecting you. There's somebody that's in labor, they're expecting you. So even if you feel like you have something that's on your birth plan, particularly if it's outside of the standard, like if you're going to be doing something that is outside of the standard and you on your way in, be like, yeah, this is me. We're the folks you heard about. We're headed in. No, you don't have to be. But as soon as you get to your birthplace, you can hand it over to whoever is going to be the first person who's providing care to you. And if you know that there's something that's super important that's on there, point it out. They don't know you from a hole in the wall. They don't know you. You just are meeting today. This will help guide them along the way. I just want to say also is if you hand over that birth plan, let me just say this real quick, because this is going to happen. So I just need y'all to be prepared. If you hand over that birth plan and they take it and they put it aside, or they take it and they don't stop immediately and look at it, I might have someone remind the individual that that's your birth plan and they're going to need a nurse who has read through it. They're going to need a nurse who has read through it. You better show this some respect. Put some respect on that birth plan. All right, because it will happen. And you don't, as the birth individual, you don't need to be the one that has to say that, but maybe you should designate an individual to be making sure that they've actually just gave 2 cents about figuring out who you were. If they show any inclination of them not wanting to care about that, I would be, look, but I'm a different person, but I'd be requesting a new nurse. I'm sorry. I'd be requesting a new provider. I don't know. But that's that.
Well, and I think you're making a great point because you've put so much work into this birth plan. I think people should we've been led to believe to do otherwise, but I think people should be really proud of their birth plan and as such, like wave it loud and proud and have copies, because if so-and-so misplace your birth plan or they can't find it after you already give it to, say, the nurse in triage, then here's another one. Here's a birth plan for you. And here's the birth plan. Like,
absolutely. It's so important because especially in the beginning part of when you're in labor and you present to your birth space, things happen really quickly. And if you're not prepared, you may have already skipped through several interventions without you having realized, oh my goodness, the birth plan starts immediately. It starts immediately.
Because it sets the tone of your birth.
Period. Yeah. That's just what it is.
And you were saying that things happen really quickly at the beginning. I find also things happen really quickly right after that baby is born. So preferences for those tend to be really cookie cutter. And if you have something out of line with that, then yeah, you have to like highlight it, put it in bold and underline it 3 times.
You better say it way ahead of time. For example, one of the things that happens relatively quickly is a moment to be provided immediate skin to skin. If you're not prepared for that, meaning that you haven't exposed the area where the baby is going to be skin to skin, the baby will not be skin to skin. The baby will be skin to t-shirt, or the baby will be skin to hospital Johnny. Or something that happens and people aren't really, aware that it's happening is that the cord is ceasing pulsations before it is clamped and cut. Sometimes these things happen really quickly and then you don't get to decide, oh, wait, we didn't want the cord clamped at all. Well, we didn't want the cord to be clamped until maybe after the placenta was born. If you're not talking about it, you get your standard operating. You get 60 seconds of cord pulsation, friend, and that's it.
Yeah. So I think it's really important to have everybody know that, and then your advocate be, just as you're starting to push or whatever, remind them.
You're not going to be annoying. You're not going to be, this is important. This is a moment that just, if you pass you by, you can miss it. You can be like, oh, I kind of wanted that, like, well, you could be prepared. You need to have your champions behind you who are willing to be like, oh, wait a second. They said they wanted this, or,
Yeah,
whatever.
there's no do-overs in birth. not in the one, unless you have another kid. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no do-overs. And when you have a birth plan, you bring it to your birth space and you present it. And most of the time, and I'm just talking in generalities because most of y'all are going to be at the hospitals delivering with different types of providers and nurses, but you'll certainly have your nurse. Your nurse will have met you for the first time. It is a good time to hand over the birth plan. They're probably going to be with you for the majority of the time. And they may have questions. They're just meeting you for that day. So they may have questions about things that you put on there. So your partners and your support people should be ready and equipped to answer those questions if you don't feel like addressing it.
And it allows for that discussion to be continued, right? To get to know you better and know a little bit about why you made those choices and really be able to uphold them. Now, The other thing that can be difficult with birth plans is when labor, with its own set of circumstances, takes a path that is not matching what you had on your birth plan, and you feel that that birth plan is getting derailed or quote unquote going out the window. How can the birthing person regain that power over their birth, that sort of that feeling of the investment they had on these choices that are now not possible? How can they navigate that?
So it's tough because there's not a lot of things in labor and birth that are like, you don't have an option and choices over. So we just have to start with that. So when we say derailing, that shouldn't be taken as a sign of disrespect or disregarding. That's different. A derailment is like I'm thinking of more like you had a plan for a vaginal birth, but it appears that you're going to be having a surgical birth. That is something that's a different situation. The majority of time, there should be not any other derailments because the majority of things will not be an emergency, and you should have time to talk about these things and decide if there is an immediate risk to you, an immediate risk to your baby. What are the alternatives? What are the consequences? What are the repercussions? Barring very, very few circumstances, very, very, very few circumstances which are truly emergency. And I just want to say as a side note for folks who deliver in a hospital that most of the time their births, even though it seems like it's an emergent situation, it's not an emergent situation. You have time to ask questions. You have time to be able to receive a full consent. And a consent is not just about signing a paper. It's about that you have got an opportunity to ask questions about why somebody would like to make a decision. Like, I can't overemphasize that enough because it just doesn't happen. So in terms of a birth plan, it really should not be about a derailment that you are being ignored or not provided an opportunity to hit any of those options on your birth plan.
Yeah. And so it's more of a readjustment and knowing that, listen, you might not have things go exactly you want, but then you have the opportunity, is what I'm hearing. You have the opportunity and time for a discussion to find an alternative that is right for you and then aligns with your choices, even though, say, it just happens that your water broke and you're not having contractions and your past due dates and all these things are showing that you might require an induction and you weren't wanting an induction to begin with. But then, okay, what can we preserve out of the essence of your birth plan during this new path that we're taking for your plan, is what I'm hearing.
That's exactly right. And it's not a all or none. And there's some things that you, like you said, like an induction, you may not have prepared for, but doesn't mean everything else is off. You get back on track. What are the other things that are important to you? What about your environment? What about your space? What about your options for, interventions? What about your support system? What about your pain management? Like, don't just be like, wow, that's just what it is. Get back on track. This is still your birth. You should never lose track of the autonomy of your birth, even when you lose a piece of having a full say-so over certain induction indications or medical diagnoses. Other than that, get on track, friend, immediately.
Stephanie, should people that are not planning to have a surgical birth still go over the process of figuring out what their choices would be if they would need a surgical birth?
No plan is our plan. And as it stands in this country with our 32% C-section rate, generally speaking, you have a 1 in 3 chance of walking into a hospital and having a surgical birth. That's just what it is. So if you've planned to ignore that piece of it in hopes that you aren't of the 1 in 3, then I hate that for you. I hate that you haven't planned in due diligence in the exact same way as these unexpected outcomes occur. But also, as I mentioned in the book as well, because I would be remiss not to mention that there are overwhelming reasons why people end up having surgical births. And if that is of utmost importance to you, then you've got to do the work that it takes to divest from what the standard is. Remember, I said the standard is 1 in 3. What can you do to change those outcomes for you? There's a lot of things. Preparation is one. But planning to not have a plan is a terrible idea because you're just going to get what we want.
Thank you so much for coming and sharing all your knowledge with us. It's been a pleasure.
Likewise. Just thank you so much for having me and for letting me speak about, the importance of folks having a birth plan and at least getting the conversation started. This is just a little icing on the decadent cake that will be your labor and birth experience, whoever that is. And I just think it's such an underutilized tool. And so I look forward to folks really starting to spend a little time in preparing for this. And I thank you so much for having me and offering my voice to your community.
That was the wonderful Dr. Stephanie Mitchell, a certified nurse midwife in Alabama and founder of the Birth Sanctuary Gainesville. And if you know anything about what it takes to build a freestanding birth center in this country, then you already know that Dr. Mitchell is a force of nature in her own right. Follow her on Instagram at Dr._midwife and at the.birth.sanctuary. And you can connect with us also on Instagram at Birthful Podcast. Now, I hope that your main takeaway from our conversation is that unless you want the industrialized cookie cutter birth plan offered by your hospital, you're going to need to determine and very clearly communicate your personal wishes. So the one thing you can do for you is to go ahead and write your birth plan. Schedule some time to do it right now. Schedule it on your calendar right away. And then for more guidance, pick up a copy of Dr. Stephanie's comprehensive guide, The First Time Parents Childbirth Handbook, a step-by-step guide for building your birth plan. Or you can go to birthful.com/birthplan, all in one word, and there you can download our birth preferences worksheet. The one thing you can do for the rest of us is to help expand birthing options that support autonomous birth plans and provide better outcomes for low-risk birthers, especially those who unjustly experience racism in their healthcare. A great way to do this is by donating to the Birth Sanctuary Gainesville, the only freestanding birth center in the state of Alabama. And to learn more, go to thebirthsanctuary.com. You can find the in-depth show notes and transcript of this episode at birthful.com, where you'll also find more about my birth and postpartum preparation classes, and you can download your free postpartum preparation plan. And if you're loving the show and it's become an invaluable resource for you, then the best way to support us is by taking any one of my perinatal classes, doing one of my doula workshops, or trying out some of the fabulous, wonderful products made by our sponsors. This is what allows us to continue doing this work. Birthful is created and produced by me, Adriana Lozada, with production assistance from Asia Plati. This episode was created in part by Lantigua Williams & Co., Paulina Velasco, Jen Chen, Cedric Wilson, and Kojin Tashiro. Thank you so very much for listening to and sharing Birthful. Be sure to follow us on GoodPod, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, and everywhere you listen. And then come back for more ways to inform your intuition.